Bitcoin has gotten a nice breakout since I last spoke to you guys, and it even touched up to around 30,500. So, in today's video, we're going to take a look at what the bulls need to be aware of and what the bears can do from this range, as things are up against some resistance in this area. There is a major overhead resistance here at 31.8 to 32.4, and we're going to review some of that stuff as well as momentum, divergence, and volatility here in this video today. We're going to take a look at the daily here to start with, and you can see that Bitcoin is currently trading right around its upper second standard deviation. That's coming in at, well, it's floating up and down, but around 30,140, 30,120 area as price kind of oscillates around it. If it does trade up above there, I would be looking to the upper third standard deviation here as the next area of interest on probably a wick basis at first at around $31,000. We need to see the Bollinger Bands expand a little bit more here. Now, I do want to call your attention to a big area to the downside. To maintain this expansion upwards here, we do need to see Bitcoin close above this upper second standard deviation. Would be nice because that's aggressive expansion to the upside. I would hit these upper targets much sooner, but what I meant to say is the upper first standard deviation here. And this area is right around where the previous wick high of the prior range was. And that is going to be about 29,250 or so. It is oscillating around. So when we're looking at live price action, that area is very important because if we are going to see this area up here at 31.8 to 32.4 get hit, if Bitcoin falls below the upper first standard deviation, we will see BBWP start to contract again. So you can see that BBWP currently is at just under 60%. It's well above the moving average here at 36.5%. So nice expansion. This does give me the bias that things will continue to go up basically. And that is the current bias, but there are a few things to be aware of. When we look at something like our BBWP in the charted format over here, you can see that even if BBWP did cool down, it's more than likely going to remain with an upside bias on price action. And how BBWP in and of itself does not tell you which way things are expanding. It's just that in this case, we know that being above the basis band here means that we'll be expanding to the upside. So just keep that in mind. Falling below that first standard deviation there would also be a bit of a bearish reclaim of the wicks. And especially below into that basis band, that would be a bearish reclaim of the prior range. So you don't really want to see that because price could very easily run the other way as the Bollinger Bands, are very wide right now and will be widening even more on this move. So that gives price a lot of leeway to run between the bands. We saw this, come up and ride kind of the top side of the third standard deviation and the upper second here while trying to hold support at the upper first, came down to the basis band and held support. That's what we would need to see again. And I do suspect after today's closure, the basis band is going to be right there at the breakout at 28,600. So now there's a few other things we can look at here, and that is Stoke. Stoke momentum is pointed nice to the upside here on volatility expansion. So everything checks out for this move to continue to the upside right now. Just, be aware of that upper first standard deviation at around that 29,250. If we look at something like RSI, I do want you to note that the potential for bearish divergence is still on the table here. Now, this would be technically, it's an in-trend bearish divergence because, RSI came right off the lows of this area down here by around 19,500 on the actual wick low. So, this is one continuous move. And that would, start to target some very large retraces eventually here. I don't think it's ready for it just yet, but that's kind of where I'm at on this. we will start to see bearish divergence build in this area. We saw some drives of it in the range prior. On the other side of that, though, you'll see bullish divergence build as well. And in this case, I don't see anything concerning. So that is all checking out currently for further upside. Now, if we do drop down the time frames into the 12-hour, for instance, you'll see that it is kind of getting overheated here. Kind of riding right up against that and closing above the upper third standard deviation here on this very nice volatility contraction. And, currently below the upper second standard deviation, which is right around 30,475 or so. So, the lower time frames, lower than the daily, can really get some nice closures and spikes into that upper third standard deviation from here. And you can see that's a little bit deeper up there at around 31,371. And the basis band here is coming in right above the breakout at around that 28,600 region. That, same thing for the daily. That does mean that I want to see closures on the 12-hour remain above the upper first standard deviation. So that's around 29,575, 29,600. That would preserve this aggressive upside expansion. We can see BBWP is at 78%, and it's not far behind is that moving average there. So that does mean that this move might enter a cool down within the next 12 to 24 hours. I suspect it would probably take around 24 hours before it entered a cool down phase and did a little bit of consolidation. So if you want to see some of these deeper targets get hit sooner rather than later, you need to see this trade back above or back around the highs that we saw yesterday at around that 30,500 area. And then to the downside, that 29.6, need to see that maintained, or else it's going to very quickly test the wicks from the prior range at around that 29,200 or so. When looking at momentum, it's up there. Stoke is in a critical region right now in the 12-hour, so it wouldn't take much to turn it down. But seeing as we're still tentatively expanding on the 12-hour, I think this move still has a little bit left, but it's going to have to do it today if it's going to, not just go into a sideways consolidation. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit of a retrace on those lower term timeframes, and that could potentially lead into the higher timeframes. So keep that in mind. This will create, it's already got some hidden bearish divergence here between, this high here and this high that was just put in, and any remaining highs that are lower than this high on RSI, which is coming in at about 78. So that is something to be aware of on the lower term timeframes. Let's go ahead and take a look at the weekly. The really low term timeframes I'm not quite as interested in right now because of the length of consolidation that we just came out of. So, and there's going to be a lot of bullish divergence that is going to be created off of this structure unless things just crash. And I'm not looking for things to crash right from here. That would be an unforeseen event. But I did want to show you this weekly. This weekly looks strong right now. Now, it must close like this. You don't want to see the weekly close back inside that wick high at around that 29,200. So keep that in mind. But we see the upper second standard deviation on the weekly, which Bitcoin loves to tap on the upper second standard deviation on the weekly. It's something that Bitcoin has done for, in my experience, like the past 6 years or so. And in this case, upper second standard deviation this week will expand at the weekly close up to around this 31.8 to 32.4 area. Of course, we have the upper third standard deviation all the way up there at around 35,500, 35,600 area. Not necessarily looking for that to get hit. Bollinger Bands are pretty wide set right now, even though we see volatility is lower here. Forgive my my arrow. Let me just get an arrow that will be appropriately sized for the weekly here. BBWP is in a transitional phase along with price here. So this is a mean reversion as it stands right now because price had, aggressively come to the downside. We were expanding to the downside, And now that Bitcoin is trying to, and it has successfully reversed the trend, with higher lows and higher highs on the way up here. But, it's from the Bollinger Band and volatility perspective, we have not yet shifted into a bull market. And when we see expansion to the upside, which we are getting that expansion to the upside, but it's a mean reversion from the volatility perspective because of how volatile the move was down. Once this shifts around, we're going full bull market. So basically, let's say Bitcoin comes back to the mean here of the basis band. Let's say it violently crashes down to 23,500, which, by the way, is a pretty key area that I'm going to go over my long form analysis. Not today. Today's going to be a little bit shorter, but that basis band at 23,500, that if price headed back there, we would see the BBWP cool down much faster. So to give you a better visual representation of that, let's go ahead and switch this off of RSI and back to BBWP. We would see this actually get a really nice, how about I find the right thing here? A really nice cool down. And then it's the next expansive phase that most likely will beget the next big bull run even. So that's what I'm looking for. That doesn't mean that prices can't continue to rise from here and test some pretty deep areas over time. For the next actual macro bull run, though, what you are going to want to watch is how the Bollinger Bands react in relation to BBWP. So the next big run up, whether it runs up or mean reverts, BBWP is going to cool down. And then we need to see the next expansive move from there. So that doesn't mean that this is not going to keep continuing to rise from here. It absolutely looks like it wants to, especially if it can maintain this structure on the weekly and then, head up to some deeper targets, maybe even past this 31.8 to 32.4 area. It's a big, big area, right? When looking at this on the weekly, you can see that this is that redistribution on the daily. So that's a big, big area of interest for the bears and for profit-taking bulls. And this area could get beaten on the weekly before we see mean reversion from the weekly. But, whenever that does happen, we need to be very aware of BBWP because the next expansive phase, I'm not really looking for it to come to the downside, to be quite honest. I know a lot are. There's some very big personalities on Twitter and on YouTube that are like, this thing's going to top out here and it's going to bomb down to that 10 to 12K region. And it's going to be all over for, 4 years or whatever it is. And it's like, nah, that's not the setup that we saw on the monthly. You can refer to my macro analysis recently. That's just not where we're at in terms of this phase. And just to quickly, point that out is we just we just put a nice monthly candle in to confirm the major low. And the next move would be to test it as a macro low. That means test the lows or around that low side structure. It holds up. We put in another major low. This becomes the macro low. I also want to note just on the monthly really quick here, there's some overlapping text here, but the basis band is something that I am looking for to get hit in this case to the upside here on the monthly. And that is coming in right at the top side of our resistance here around that 32.4 level, which is a daily level. So that's going to be my take on price action for you in the more long form video here. Reminder for those that only watch the long form videos, I do daily updates in the shorts section of YouTube. You can just find it on my channel homepage, or if you like and subscribe and hit that little bell notification down there, you'll get them automatically delivered to your feed. So I go over everything that I just talked about in 60 seconds for the daily only, though. And if you do like this content, go ahead and like and subscribe. I would like to see more of you guys around some of the long form videos as well. So please share it if you can, and if you found it helpful. With all of this being said, I do want to wish you all a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening, no matter where you are in the world. Please trade safe. And of course, as always, stay safe. And with all of that being said, Landy out.